Hi everybody, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to talk about mechanics in the new set, the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. We're going to go over new mechanics and returning mechanics, what their niche might be in limited and constructed play, and just kind of talk about them. Let's do it. The first mechanic is craft. Craft, effectively, you pay a cost and then exile a card type that craft is associated with. So for example, Idol of the Deep King has craft with artifact, and it has a cost of 1 red and 2 generic. Craft with artifact means that you exile that card and another artifact from either the battlefield or your graveyard as a cost to transform that card. And the idea is to turn something not very cool into something very good. Idol of the Deep King, being a 3-mana artifact when it enters the battlefield, dealing 2 damage to any target and then nothing else, flips into an equipment that gives +2/+0, equip 2, and when it enters the battlefield, you automatically get to attach it. The one downside is you can craft only at sorcery speed, so Idol of the Deep King being flash doesn't really matter as far as an equipment attaching. But being able to kind of cash in on permanents that aren't doing much, I think adds a lot of really cool deck building options, and mana sinks and limited are always super welcome. The next mechanic is the antonym of the first Ixalan set with Ascend. It is Descend. Descend is triggered similar to Revolt, but it is different, where a permanent card is put into your graveyard from anywhere. So the reason this is different than Revolt is twofold. One, Revolt didn't care if it was a card or not, meaning that tokens, like a treasure token leaving the battlefield, even if you sacrifice it, technically that token touches the graveyard, but tokens are not considered cards, so it won't trigger Descend. The other way it's different than Revolt is that cycling a permanent, like Troll of Khazad-dûm, will trigger Descend because it doesn't say entering the graveyard from the battlefield, and it makes the cards do more. For example, Bloodrage Mycoid is a 4-mana 4/3 fungus, and it says at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, create a 1/1 black fungus creature token with this creature can't block. So it powers up cards as you would think. Now there's also, I would argue, a vastly different mechanic where if it says descend a certain number. So for example, Didact Echo is a 5-mana 3/2 that has Descend 4, and rather than cards entering the graveyard, or caring about cards entering the graveyard, it cares about there being a certain number of permanent cards in your graveyard in general. So don't get that mixed up. Next is a really exciting mechanic for me, which is Discover, which is a little similar to Cascade, except for 2 major ways. Cascade triggers when you cast a card and is totally tied to that card's mana cost. Discover is not tied to the mana cost and triggers when a card enters the battlefield or does something else. It is not just with cast. So it's kind of like a looser Cascade. And for those that you don't know, Discover, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card with mana value that number. So if it's Discover 3, mana value 3 or less, cast it without paying its mana cost or put it into your hand with the rest in the bottom in a random order. And I even forgot one more difference. You can choose to put it into your hand if you want instead of cast it. Hopefully this will add to some like really cool and fun decks, especially since a Cascade deck has already existed in Standard. But you know, we'll see. Not to be confused with Discover, we have the return of Explore. Explore being a mechanic where there's a lot of things that can trigger it, but basically you look at the top card of your library and reveal it. If it's a land, you put it into your hand. If it's not a land, a +1/+1 counter gets put on the creature that is exploring. And you can either put that card back on top of your deck or put it into your graveyard. This allows for some awesome card selection and to sort of cash in on valuable creatures that are exploring. And the last thing isn't really a mechanic, but it's an evergreen thing that's being introduced in Ixalan, and that is finality counters. So there's a lot of effects in Magic that return something to the battlefield or whatever, and if this would die, exile it instead. From now on, that is going to be expressed with a finality counter. If a card would do that, it'll say, put a finality counter on this creature. And all a finality counter means is if that card would die, exile it instead. And so there's an evergreen thing being introduced, though finality, you know, being paired with dinosaurs and stuff like that, it's a tasteful way to introduce that mechanic, I think. Ends up being evergreen. But those are the new mechanics in Lost Caverns of Ixalan. If you like this video and want to see more videos like this, please be sure to like and subscribe and let me know what you thought down in the comments. All of that helps a ton. Also, check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description, especially on Twitter and Discord. Join the communities there. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.